I would like to welcome you to the 4th episode of the International Society for Horticultural Science of Hort Forum, with the title Dynamic Control Atmosphere Storage, a Paradigm Shift in Post-Harvest Science. We have the pleasure today to have as invited speaker Dr. Angelo Zanella from the research unit of Laimburg in Italy, who is also at the same time leader of the post-harvest biology and storage group in this institute. He's also lecturer in the Pre-University of Bolzano, and I think is the most appropriate person to give this talk. We also have the great pleasure and honor to have as panelists today Bart Nicolai from the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, Professor Chris Watkins from Cornell University, United States, Robert Prange, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Research Unit, and Professor Auri Brackmann from the Federal University of Santa Maria in Brazil. Before giving the floor to Angelo for his talk, I would like to give the floor to Professor DeJong, and later on to give the floor to Giancarlo Colelli, who is the chair of the post-harvest group in the ISHS. Ted.
Yes, on behalf of the ISHS, I welcome you all to this Hort Forum. The object of the Hort Forum is to have a frank discussion about topics and a good interchange of ideas. And so I hope you all enjoy this session, and feel free to bring up any questions or concerns that you have about anything that's spoken. Have a good forum.
Thank you very much, Ted, for your brief talk. I will give the floor to Giancarlo.
Thanks, George. I thank you very much for organizing this webinar within the activities of the divisions. In our division, we have a number of different events which deals with controlled atmospheres. And one specific conference is actually dedicated to controlled and modified atmosphere research conference. I'm happy to see that the last convener of this conference, Dr. Bart Nicolai, is here within the panelist. I myself convened this conference in 2013, I guess. And I will give more information about the next CAMA conference later on during this webinar. I'm very glad that Angelo, Dr. Zanella, of course, is the invited speaker for this talk. And I think, as you said, as you mentioned, is one of the most entitled scientists to speak about dynamic controlled atmosphere storage. So I give the mic to you back, George, and
yes, thank you very much, Giancarlo.
Listen to Angelo.
Thanks for the introduction. Before giving the floor to Dr. Zanella, I would like to notify to the participants that we will have a talk about 30 minutes. Afterwards, we will hear the panelist perspective. We have actually the first round of comments. And then please feel free to make any questions through the Q&A session. So based on the questions, I will receive responses, and the moderators will try to convey the most interesting out of them to the panelists in order to try to have a fruitful and constructive discussion. Please also note that at the very end of this webinar, all registered attendees will receive a PDF copy of the presentation delivered by Dr. Zanella. So, Angelo, the floor is yours for the next 30 minutes.
Okay, so thank you, George, for organizing, and thanks to you all for inviting me. Thank you, Giancarlo, for also the introduction. I remember that it was approximately 10 years ago that you invited me to the CAMA conference, and it was a great experience. And I thank you for this honor because I know that many other people could do same and even perhaps than me. So I will try to take responsibility for talking about dynamic controlled atmosphere storage, how it could be a paradigm shift in post-harvest science. And I would, if I can change the slide, okay. So, and I would like to talk out of the perspective of research, but research that is carried out in the way we do at the Laimburg. We create the know-how, we elaborate solutions, and we are trying to make pioneering innovations for the practical agriculture. So in this way, we are working in the field of applied research, but connected to basic research and to experimental and development. So where are we? Located very briefly in north of Italy, in the south Tyrol. And this is a region that grows mainly apples in the heart of the Alps. And why do I state this? Because this is in fact a research experience that got validated by practice, and it is, I think, a relevant practice because we grow approximately 10% of the European apples and 25% of the organic production of the EU. 34% of this production is scald susceptible. And scald causes important loss of market value. This is the reason why we were focusing since beginning on the prevention of superficial scald. As you can see here, one publication of the year 2003 was dealing with the effect of alternatives to the post-harvest treatment with diphenyl mine, and applying already different storage technologies. So what was clear from the beginning is that there is a strong effect of low oxygen atmosphere on the prevention of this physiological disorder, especially very low continuous oxygen levels, or also the so-called ILOS additional low oxygen stress. With a level of 0.4%, but only for 2 weeks. So knowing this, we exactly 20 years ago, we got the first great result by upscaling research done on this low oxygen level, applying already the DCA method. And you see, 20 years ago, we were able, without any post-harvest treatment, to prevent complete scald in many different batches of different origins. And this was very important because at the same time, there was a concern about the DPA use, and very soon in the year 2011, DPA got banned in the EU. And it was, in fact, also a global issue that DPA was not anymore allowed, and we needed an answer for this. We needed alternatives. So this is a bit the background for the research done by our group on dynamic controlled atmosphere, and I would like now to develop a little bit the topic, but a little bit historically, and come to the development of now several dynamic controlled atmospheres and how they could be a paradigm shift in post-harvest. So the purpose of dynamic storage in CA is that CA levels should respond always to the actual needs of the food. Resulting in flexible CA conditions during the full storage period, and not always the constant, the same conditions. So obtaining all the consequent benefits by tailor-made storage condition that respects the cultivar, the ripening stage, seasonal variation, location, pedoclimatic conditions. In the paradigm is, in fact, that the atmospheric composition is not longer static, not longer set at a specific constant level, so-called optimal levels that you can find or we can find in recommendation tables that are very precious because they contain the knowledge of and the experience of many trials and people. In fact, we still do it. This is a very updated table, but the idea was to use instead the physiology of the food that should tell us how to adjust dynamical to its needs the atmosphere. So roughly we can categorize the principle of dynamic CA into two groups. The first one is dynamic phase determined by empirical data. This is the historically older version of coming out from this static condition and changing the conditions during storage. And the second one is in fact using biosensing for determining the food physiological needs and accordingly setting the atmosphere conditions. So the first category was working with different dynamic meters with CO2, with temperature CO2, and also with oxygen, and was statically setting, looking on tables, for example, increasing the CO2 level in certain given periods, or also decreasing the temperature gradually, and at the same time also decreasing gradually the CO2. But this was all done following empirical recommendation of data. While the modern way of determining the DCA is in fact by determining the food physiological response to the controlled atmosphere. And already in 2003, we postulated potential physiological response factors that could allow this physiological control, such as anaerobic compensation point, respiratory quotient, metabolites of anaerobic respiration, such as ethanol or acetaldehyde, ethylene production, external color change, composition determined by NIR spectroscopy or chlorophyll fluorescence. So these are postulated physiological response factors that could have been useful. The focus was on the lower oxygen limit, the so-called LOL. That is the minimum limit of oxygen tolerated by plants. Because decreasing the oxygen limit as low as possible slows down the aerobic respiratory metabolism and inhibits oxidative processes that are in fact the cause of many of the symptoms of physiological disorders. Therefore, we could expect benefits on preventing the respiratory-driven catabolism of internal quality, then preventing or slowing down ethylene-related ripening processes, and preventing physiological disorders. One of the first parameters used for determining, for identifying LOL was to determine the fermentation threshold. So if we observe the respiration with decreasing oxygen level, going direction at very low oxygen levels that are close to the lower oxygen limit, the LOL, we see that at a certain point, there's a switch and anaerobic respiration is turned on, and later we will see what is the use of turning on anaerobic respiration. But let's say now we see it turns on because we have low oxygen levels. And anaerobic respiration leads to the accumulation of other metabolites than aerobic respiration, mainly lactate, ethanol, acetaldehyde, ethyl acetate. So the idea was to measure fermentative metabolites as an indicator for being close to the LOL. This was done in the 90s and later, mainly by our Dutch colleagues in Wageningen, around Van Schaik, Schouten, and they termed that DCS, the dynamic control system, and it became also DCS trademark. The system, first, they were doing measurement in headspace in the storage rooms, and later it was, in fact, the analytical measurement was a little bit complex, and also there was not really a clear relation between the headspace content and the content in the food, and therefore later there was a change measuring the ethanol content in the fruit juice. And in fact, it is this methodology is going on mainly until recently. And moreover, there was also a further development of the ILOS method, this initial low oxygen stress for 2 weeks at very low oxygen level, was then, in fact, was not completely effective, for example, in preventing scald. And there was an improvement in the effect by repeating this stress, and an indicator for when it was allowed to repeat again in order to not incur in too high fermentation was to regularly measure again the ethanol as an indicator. All these methods are not really completely biosensing, because there's always a knowledge necessary, needed behind that gives information how high is the concentration of the tolerated fermentative metabolites. Then we came to the indirect, let's call it indirect identification of LOL compared to ethanol. Ethanol is a direct product of fermentation, and chlorophyll fluorescence is not directly linked like the product ethanol. And it was in the year 2001 that Prange, the present here, was presenting at the CA conference in Rotterdam the observation that chlorophyll fluorescence sensor that he was using responded at low oxygen levels with fluorescence spike signals. So it was already earlier, has been already observed a potential by Jennifer DeL of fluorescence for indicating post-harvest disorders. And the development then went on with, I think, many publications, but what was also important was that Prange patented, if I'm right, in the year 2003, the method. We were picking up this information and from the beginning also working on it. And this is already in the year 2001, one of our first recording of response of fluorescence with the black line to deliberately decrease oxygen to very extremely low levels. So we see an immediate response, and we see also that there is no response to the opposite, to a sudden increase in oxygen concentration. That was really a very interesting tool, because it was showing us without destroying foods, without and continuously, let's say almost hourly, was giving us an information about the hypoxia condition of the fruit. Moreover, these sensors are allowing to measure under the same conditions the response of different quality of fruits. And this is very important because in large growing areas where we produce 10% of European apples, the growing regions are not same. So we cannot really rely on methods that measure an average of a huge amount of fruits. We need an indication on variability of the response of the fruits. Here's an example of following 6 different batches of grapes pink during all the storage. And we see nicely some response to lower oxygen levels here, very drastic because we went down to 0% of oxygen. And we see that they are very similar, but not equal. There are differences between the batches. At that time, because the method fluorescence is rather indirect method, it was necessary to do empirical validation of the LOL that we were determining by fluorescence. Because at that time there was not really the knowledge about the link to hypoxia and the chlorophyll fluorescence. So we did a lot of experiments with many different varieties and very different focus. And one important outcome was that together with Franz Gasser, we observed that the black fluorescence spike here correlated clearly with the anaerobic compensation point that was determined by the respiratory quotient. So we saw that there is a relation between the fluorescence and spike and the gaseous response that is in fact giving us information about the respiratory condition state. We went on with this work, and this is a recent publication where we compared, for example, different maturity index using the DA index, the diameter index of the same batch of fruits, and we could again confirm that there is a very good corresponding link between fluorescence spike and fluorescence spike in green and the RQ measured on the fruits. This is now with red emission. Having got this powerful tool that allows to determine LOL in such a simple way, we were confronted with the issue of which are the appropriate CO2 levels for these rather extreme oxygen levels that we never applied until that moment. And what we did at the beginning was we lowered the CO2 level at the same ratio as we lowered the oxygen level. And this was leading to pretty low CO2 levels required at the very low oxygen levels. That was, in fact, not really a good news because keeping very low CO2 levels, it needs high-performing CO2 scrubbers for scrubbing away, and it leads to a more cost, more energy. So we calculated that the decrease that I was showing you before, from decreasing from 1 kilopascal to 0.5, was doubling the energy. Even, in fact, the good news is that the CO2 scrubbers are not consuming a lot of energy because the energy more was approximately for one room with 350 tons of apple was approximately 7 kilowatt more. And nowadays, it's the more cost-efficient scrubbers less. Anyhow, we did many years of trials and were able, for some varieties, for example, for Gala, to rise the CO2 level tolerated from 0.7 to 1.2. But not for every variety. The varieties that I think who works with Postharvest apples know them well, Brackmann, Fuji, and the pink lady group are sensitive, and still we cannot store them at high CO2 levels. It was necessary to develop for different variety clusters specific protocols that are dealing especially with the first phase of the DCA, and this I think is necessary for every DCA method. I'm now talking a little bit more about the fluorescence, but I don't want to talk only about fluorescence. But when we talk about storing at low oxygen conditions, all this knowledge applies to all of these technologies. And why did we have to develop these different protocols, several variety clusters? Because we had to respect mainly the gradual cooling procedures, the delay of oxygen pull down necessary, and especially the safety margin in setting the oxygen value. Typically, this safety margin was or is the LOL plus 0.2. This depends on the biological variability, and this is a big, it's very important to underline. With every method that we are using, we are measuring only we're getting only a representative response of a huge amount of individuals that have a biological variability. And there are many papers where they set the oxygen value to the LOL value. But this is in fact not taking into account that many of that foods will have a different LOL. And therefore, we always set a safety margin depending on the biological variability of the foods that can be measured by using different sensors on different batches. What we never wanted in with DCA by chlorophyll fluorescence was to produce ethylene. So the idea of the safety margin was to know what is the hypoxic threshold and to stay above. And here we see that from 9 varieties tested, there was no relevant ethanol production after storage, and storage duration is on the x-axis, with the only exception of red delicious. Red delicious is a great producer of fermentative metabolites. And here I wish to show you when it happens. In fact, it happens mainly in the phase when we lower the oxygen below the LOL, when we do it for determining the LOL. So we get a rise in ethanol production. Here we have ethanol. This is 14 days after starting of the DCA. Later on, this accumulated ethanol is degraded, and in this case, already after 16 weeks, it was almost not anymore present, and later it's completely degraded. So this is very evident in this variety that produces a lot, and this is our model variety, and we compare it usually to Granny Smith that is behaving in a completely different way in our research and in our publications, as many of you know, I think. So a further step was also to try to prolong the quality retention by combining the DCA CS with 1 MCP treated fruits, and to our surprise, we observed that in fact the LOL keeps similar, as we can see in this example, on green line fruits treated with 1 MCP compared to the same bench fruits untreated with MCP. Meanwhile, we got by some experimental evidence for the physiological link between the chlorophyll fluorescence response and the LOL. And this was done by the group of Prange, especially by Harrison Wright. And there was evidence for how chlorophyll fluorescence is related to the low oxygen. By the way, that if we have a low oxygen presence in the mitochondria, we get an accumulation of the reductant levels. So we get, because there is not enough oxygen to be reduced, we also get an accumulation of the reducing agents, NADH and FADH. So what happens with them? They get, when the accumulation is in higher amounts, they get translocated to the membrane in the chloroplasts. And there, the overreduction of the plastoquinone pools impairs the electron transport in the chloroplast, and this impairing doesn't, in fact, is quenching the response of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, in fact, when it gets illuminated, like our detector does regularly, is not able to transport the electrons, and one part of the energy is then given with lower wavelength as an fluorescence emission. This source of reductants is in fact the citric acid cycle. And the citric acid cycle, in the case of low oxygen, is also then slowed down, and the only way of letting it work is to turn on the anaerobic respiration. So the anaerobic respiration produces almost no energy, produces a few of ATP, nothing compared to the oxidative phosphorylation, but it regenerates the NADH. So the function of it is regenerating NADH. In fact, it would help a little bit to detoxify, let's say, the chloroplasts. But obviously, it works less. Interestingly, we found in work that we have done with in Pisa with Tonutti, that could be that some varieties that don't produce almost ethanol like Granny Smith are using the anaerobic way of glutamate. So we cannot even find ethanol present as a fermentative metabolite. This is also, let's say, an argument against using these fermentative metabolites in specific cultivars. And this is also something that I want to stress. We have also always to think also of specific cultivars when we talk about DCA. Anyhow, we can determine the activity of citric acid cycle and anaerobic respiration together by CO2 release. In fact, citric acid cycle is releasing CO2 and the anaerobic respiration is releasing CO2. So if I measure the CO2 produced, I get an information about both. The not nice thing is that it gives us information about citric acid cycle is aerobic and about anaerobic respiration together. So it is not really the information is mixed. But if we use also the oxygen uptake measured, then we get a very good information about the oxic condition of the cell. And this is given by the respiratory quotient. So the respiratory quotient is in fact the concentration of CO2 released by citric acid cycle and anaerobic respiration, and the oxygen consumed by aerobic respiration. So there are different ways to obtain energy, and if we look purely, if our fruits would only oxidize glucose, the RQ would be 1. If they would oxidize only a malate, the RQ would be 1.3. Obviously, there's a mix-up, and so we would measure values between 1 and 1.3. if we would oxidize fatty acids, the RQ would be below 1. But this is not a general way of producing energy in food. Anaerobic processes would definitely show us RQ values higher than 1.4, going up to endless, because the anaerobic fermentation of glucose, if only this is turned on, doesn't produce any CO2. And this is, in fact, a method that has been applied for identifying the LOL. Either using a fixed RQ value, let's say using fixed RQ values chosen above the aerobic ones, or to determine the breaking point of the respiratory quotient. So this was already known since, I think, there's physiology, since Pasteur was working with the yeast, and already in the 90s, Yearsley was already working with this, and then later many others. But there are some reasons why recently, let's say, approximately, not very recently, more than 1 decade ago, but then now recently, this method is more and more applied, because cost-effective analytical devices to measure oxygen and CO2 came up with the required precision and accuracy that is necessary for determining the small changes in oxygen and CO2 that are necessary for calculating the RQ. And moreover, also the rooms got better gas tightness and allowed an in-room RQ determination in some cases. Anyhow, to determine RQ is not very easy. As you can see from this publication by Weber et al. In 2015, especially in the case when we go to higher RQ levels, the RQ determined are ranging between 2 and 7. At lower RQs, the RQs are lower, but you have to focus on the gray shaded line. These are the RQs. There is a lot of fluctuation. There have been different ways of applying the DCA. Now this table looks perhaps a bit confusing, but it is very simple. I want just to pay tribute to the people that were working on that, trying to, and please forgive me because I cannot mention all of them, but mainly Auri Brackmann that is here, and his group in Brazil at the University of Santa Maria did a lot of work, and mainly using fixed RQ values. For example, setting the RQ at 2, fixing the RQ at 2, and then setting the oxygen accordingly to always obtain an RQ of 2 or of 4 or of 6. So mainly on Royal Gala apples, but later also some other varieties. So a lot of work has been done on that, obtaining interesting results. And later, the group about Nicolai, that's also present here, Peter Verboven and Niels Bessemans, were improving the detection of the RQ by modeling the leakage that is disturbing the determination of RQ, and also using the RQ breakpoint instead of fixing the DCA value. This is a lot of work done, and it is very interesting, in fact, to be aware that the RQ determination influences the metabolism. It is a determination that influences by itself the metabolism. And we can see it very nicely in this nice diagram by Taylor et al. In 2022, where they were observing the oxygen level in blue and without RQ determination, and then with more and more frequent acute determination. So in gray, we have determination once a week, in green, twice a week, and in red, daily. So what happens? In fact, because we have the necessity to lower the oxygen level for assessing the RQ value, the oxygen value is many times below the LOL. And they were then measuring the fermentative metabolites. Here we see ethylene acetate. And what we can see is with a high frequency, this is daily, we got the high accumulation of these fermentative metabolites. Doing it twice a week was already less. Once a week was similar. Without, we don't have any accumulation. So this is, in fact, giving also hints that we, in fact, induced with these methods the development of many compounds. And therefore, many times there's the argument the fruits have more aroma, volatile organic compounds. They have better flavor. And here we have to take care because a low concentration can improve flavor. High concentrations can lead to off flavors. And then the question comes, is the improved flavor a typical flavor? This is a question that came also practically to me during this applying these DCA technologies. What we see here in a publication by Anese in 2020 is that at high RQ 1.5, it's mean we had a high accumulation of total esters compared to 1.3 and compared to DCA with chlorophyll fluorescence, because as I told you, with chlorophyll fluorescence, we don't want to do a hypoxic. But what is also an interesting observation is if you compare with 1 MCP, there is a higher, slightly higher accumulation of these esters that are precursors for some of aroma-giving VOX. Also, the group around Deberis, Richard Colgan, Fisher, and I published just recently a very nice publication comparing the chlorophyll response with the RQ in whole and cold fruit and fruit peel from cultivar Gala and Braeburn. And there are many interesting insights. Finally, what came out is that for low oxygen tolerant cultivars, the chlorophyll fluorescence gave more distinct information. For other cultivars like Braeburn that is not as low oxygen tolerant, the two methods were equally valid. So here we had an RQ determined by the so-called safe pod. Safe pod is also technology that was developed. So the most recent developments that are now closely related to RQ, but don't have any more as a dynamic principle RQ, but they have CO2 alone, are coming again from Brazil by Teves et al. And also the colleagues around Daniel Neuwald, Felix Büchele, the first author, were even combining this CO2 controlled DCA with temperature control. So this is a so-called DCA-CD. And here, in fact, the CO2 production is in fact in the focus, the CO2 production rate, and an algorithm that takes care of the needs of different cultivars and is able also to include the temperature. And in the DCA-CD plus, termed like this in the publication by Büchele, it was possible to adjust autonomous for the storage temperature. So concluding, the dynamic feedback systems fulfill the required characteristics that have been already postulated by Saltwig in 2003. Reliability, let's say, reliability, the fluorescence sensor can measure many different batches. With the other measurement, usually you measure an average of all the individuals. Continuous fluorescence hourly, and we have seen already the R2 should not be measured too often, not to influence the metabolism. They are both non-destructive, measurable at distance, capable of automation, and are highly correlated with specific quality parameters. So the DCA storage, anyhow, is as good as though the oxygen level can be increased. And the disadvantage is that the effect doesn't extend the post-storage life. So the effects are not only superficial scald prevention, but also preventing senescence disorders, for example, in terms of browning, because we just prevent the oxidation of the tissue and preservation of greenness by slowing down ripening processes. And we have observed during many years, this is a summary of many years of here firmness retention in percentage compared to the reference ULO. And we see that DCA on the cultivar wood and delicious is preserving better than the reference and similarly to 1 MCP. Even after shelf life, even MCP is reaching almost 30%, while DCA is reaching 15%. Here we see also the, let's say, the competition to the 1 MCP treatment and the cultivar specificity. Fuji is almost not reacting to the conditions given by the DCA. The challenge to this DCA effect is the interruption of DCA storage. So if we are forced to interrupt the DCA storage, we don't get the effect anymore of the low oxygen. This can happen if there is if some foods cannot be marketed, whether there is a long transit to distant target markets, 1 month, 2 months, transportation on container ships, or also long marketing periods under adverse climatic conditions, under adverse shelf life conditions. So we did some experiments. You see storing interrupting DCA after 2 months or after 4 months. And if we interrupt it after 2 months plus 3 months, it is compulsory to apply a controlled atmosphere. Regular atmosphere alone is not enough. And also regarding this, many of colleagues have done other research. So coming to the end, this is now the updated status of the storage technologies in a relevant growing region. We grow 10% of the European apples. So what we see is that we have only 40% of ULO storage now. We have approximately 40% of MCP with ULO, and we have approximately 20% of DCA, from which 10% are DCA with 1 MCP. And here you see a very interesting graph. This is the development of the storage technologies in South Tyrol in the last decade. And what you see, the green share is the MCP treatment that is expanding, pulling down the ULO, but also the DCA is not stagnating. The DCA is not increasing. I got some numbers about the DCA rooms number worldwide, and we can see, first of all, the gray bars are in fact Italy, are mainly South Tyrol, and we see at the beginning was an increase, and then we see what I showed you, there's a kind of stagnation. But worldwide, before there was a lag, there was a gap, and now there is a continuous increase. what leads to approximately 3,000 rooms. Just to get an idea on one technology, it's not to advertise this technology, but just to get an idea, this was an easy way to get. And what is also perhaps very interesting to analyze, but we cannot do now here, is the cultivar specificity. So here you see per cultivar which soil condition is applied. So for example, on golden delicious, you have mainly ULO and a little bit of MCP and very little DCA. While, for example, on Brackmann, we have mainly DCA and almost no ULO. So there is a cultivar specificity for these technologies. And why? Because I am used to say there's not the best technology. There's one technology for every situation. And this is a fast way to try to explain it. At the bottom, I have different starting conditions, different ripening stages, different quality conditions of the fruit. And on the y-axis, I have in fact the storage duration, the post-harvest life, the same time. And depending on these two dimensions, I can choose, I can manage this diversity of storage technologies. Now I'm finishing trying to give an outlook for the future, but I think I gave already many ideas. I think one point is to refine existing DCA technologies by automation, by efficiency, energy efficiency, by reliability. Then it is to add biosensing, going beyond the LOL, a biosensing that is helping us to determine the CO2 tolerance, the chilling sensitivity, the age, the maturity. And then fusing different principles, different sensors, spectral sensors, gaseous sensors, and the sensors that we already are used to. Focus on other crops, developing expert systems, predictive models, and DSS. Now with artificial intelligence is behind every corner. And also giving a look on perhaps more collaborative work between research and industry. So with this, I am finished. I took longer, but I hope that I could give you some topics for the further discussion, which I look happily forward. I would really thank very much to all the colleagues that were doing research on that, and I apologize if I mentioned only partly or if I didn't mention completely, because a lot of work has been done. It is very difficult to summarize it in a very short time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelo. We will move directly to the statements by the panelists. We will start with Chris Watkins. Chris. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Hello, everybody. So that was a very difficult act to follow. Thank you, Angelo, for that very comprehensive overview. I'm going to talk a little bit from a North American perspective, but state at the outset that I cannot talk for Washington, which is the big giant in the apple storage world in North America. I think Angelo's highlighted several important issues that drove the development of DCA in Europe that perhaps were lacking in the North American context. So the first of all was the loss of DPA. And very much the initial work on DCA was focused on that technology being an alternative method to control superficial scald. In North America, we still have DPA. It's still used extensively for superficial scald control. So that has been less of a driver. The other is Granny Smith. A lot of the work done with Granny Smith is a key cultivar with superficial stoled. But the key thing from at least the New York perspective is that Granny Smith is what we would call a hard apple. And at the time that DCA was being developed or being tested, we were still heavily reliant in New York on what we call soft apples, Macintosh, Empire, Macau, Cortland. And these are apples that don't maintain their texture very well after they've been removed from storage. And we found that our cultivar effects in terms of the residual effect of DCA was disappointing with a lot of those soft varieties. And especially when compared with 1-MCP. So what we had, I think, across the US was a big growth in DCA for organics in Washington State, especially. They have a rapidly expanding organic apple industry, and obviously you can't use DPA and you can't use 1-MCP. Third factor, and this is something that I've discussed with Bob Prange in the past. We had a bad history of using ULO in some parts of the US. And why, it's still a mystery to this day, why the varieties that we now store at very low oxygen levels, not so long ago, would ferment at levels of 1.5% oxygen. It's sort of an anomaly. Bob has suggested that it's because we somehow shoot through perhaps that risk zone. I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. Anyway, the bottom line is we had a history of not having much confidence in ULO. So the real driver and what I would call the awakening for DCA in at least the part of the world that I live in was not superficial stole control, was not necessarily maintaining quality per se, because we had alternatives, but it was really the incredible effect that DCA has on managing a number of physiological disorders, internal flesh browning disorders. This is especially the case with Gala. I think in your graph at the very end there, Angelo, you have Gala with a substantial ULO component. And certainly this is the case in the Northeast. And in fact in Washington, if you apply DCA, increase the storage temperature, use of PGRs, it's sort of a whole package of things. You can markedly control a major loss of fruit condition that is browning in Gala apples. And for those of you in Europe, you may not realize that Gala is now the #1 apple in North America. And the finishing comment that I would make, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to have more discussion as points come up, is we have a revolution in new apple cultivars going on, largely driven by the success of Honeycrisp in North America, which is a remarkable apple that has really returned incredible financial returns to growers. That and a number of its progeny, Evercrisp and other related varieties, actually are injured, or 1-MCP will enhance some of the physiological disorders. So DCA now becomes a very, very critical part of management of those disorders for some of these new varieties that we didn't have to worry about before. So I'll stop there, and I think George will probably come back around as we have more discussion.
Thank you very much. Already by some attendees, we have some questions. So if any of the panelists or the speaker feel that they can reply, or then keep it for his the presentation of his points, feel free to do so. I will give now the floor to Bart Nicolai for his main points regarding DCA storage. Bart.
Okay, thank you, George. Also, thank you, Angelo, for a very nice overview of the state of the art of DCA. And I actually wrote down quite a few very interesting statements that you made, but I will pick out a few of them just to give my appreciation of them. And some of them relate more to the practical application or the implementation of DCA in the industry, and other ones relate more to what I would call fundamental insights into the physiology, of which you also gave a very nice example. But maybe let's first start with the implementation aspects. And I was certainly intrigued by that slide where you discussed the effect on energy use by scrubbers of carbon dioxide, and where you tested basically different carbon dioxide levels, which I think is really very important issue, because maybe a little bit less than a couple of years ago or 2 years ago, when energy was extremely or becoming extremely expensive, energy savings was really very high on the agenda in Europe, in the sense that many horticulture cooperatives basically only did investments that would affect the energy use. And if you look at controlled atmosphere storage, ULO and DCA, then of course the main energy component is the respiration losses that you have to remove by cooling the fruit. And then you also have the scrubbers. And while the scrubber is not that important and removing the respiration heat, of course, everything that you can save is very welcome. And in fact, we also decided that we would rather go for larger carbon dioxide levels, as long as the fruit quality would not be affected, in order to save some scrubbing time. But I think that the major, besides the quality issues, one of the major advantages of DCA is that we are really looking at an oxygen range in which there is a linear relationship between the respiration activity, so also the respiration heat, and the oxygen concentration, because we are in the linear range of the Michaelis-Menten kinetics, which means that if you can reduce the oxygen, or if you can have the oxygen concentration in the cool room, you basically also reduce the respiration heat by 50%. Which I think is very important. But of course, there's one thing that is talking about the theory, and then there's the other thing about actually measuring it. And what we found was that it is actually not that easy, certainly in large-scale installations, to measure the energy consumption. And I think we need much more research into the benefits of DCA with respect to reduction of energy, because it is very likely that in the future energy costs will go up again, depending on the geopolitical situation, especially in Europe. Maybe related to that, or at least related to the implementation side of RQDCA, Angelo, you mentioned that the difficulty of maintaining the low oxygen atmosphere, which is actually, or you actually mentioned the difficulty of measuring the RQ value, which is over the last decade, so to speak, has improved, not only because of better sensors, but also because of the better air tightness of the cool rooms. But there's another very good reason why we need, of course, this air tightness, and that is the very reason that we can only get those low oxygen atmospheres if we have airtight cool rooms, because we basically remove in practice the oxygen by the fruit that is respiring, and it is removing the oxygen. So we don't scrub the oxygen away, we only scrub the carbon dioxide away. At least this is how we do it here. Which means that if your rooms are not airtight, then oxygen will basically leak in, and this makes it very difficult to get those low oxygen levels, certainly below 1%. And this then relates to what you mentioned about the collaboration between research institutes and big companies. because while I think that you can perfectly do regular controlled atmosphere research, optimizing oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the lab in small containers and so on, and then extrapolate this to large-scale cool stores, 200, 300-ton cool stores, this is much more difficult for DCA because there you have the air tightness, and air tightness really relates very much to the surface area per volume. And the surface area per volume is very, very large in small-scale containers compared to large cool rooms where the surface area is relatively much smaller. And in order to extrapolate results that you have on this small scale to large scales, well, you need to, at some point, test your protocols in industry, even much more than what you need to do in normal controlled atmosphere optimization and so on. And then I have maybe last comment related to research. I liked very much the slide where you showed the DCA cycle, and you nicely explained why ethanol is not really an ideal measure to measure the physiological activity or the physiological state of the fruit, and that's of course because of alanine, which we at least I never thought about in the past, but over the last couple of years it has become really clear that together with ethanol and acetaldehyde and lactic acid, alanine is one of the most important fermentation metabolites. And such knowledge is really essential, and you can only get this by studying the biochemistry. But I think that the biochemistry, or at least the metabolomics level, is not enough. And the reason is that we know that, and you mentioned this also, that all DCA protocols sort of include also a kind of a time effect, in the sense that you have to do something, you have to be very careful in the beginning of the DCA storage, and if you do something later on, it doesn't matter that much. So this first period is very important, and this implies that the metabolism in this first period is very different than the metabolism later on. So by just looking at the DCA, at the DCA cycle and the biochemistry maps and so on, it's simply not enough. And the reason is that there are some important changes that happen in the first phase of the application of controlled atmosphere, or DCA, where we believe that there are some drastic reconfigurations of at the transcriptome level, which means that basically the metabolism totally changes, and the metabolism later in the storage really is very, very different, and it is much less strict in terms of conditions and so on. This means that we need to study what is happening, and there's quite some information already, but the difficulty is that if you are combining all those levels and so on, it really drives you mad if you want to integrate this knowledge into your head and try to extrapolate what is basically going on. And this means that we will need to have much more modeling to integrate all those levels. And in terms of modeling, I definitely think about metabolic pathway models, but probably at some point also AI, deep learning techniques to kind of integrate all those information and basically use it to come up with new strategies which might be timed, or which will likely be time varying. So these are a few of my insights. Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, Bart, for the insightful points. I will now give the floor to Professor Brackmann. Auri, we heard a lot of your innovations in the presentation of Angelo, so please feel free to fill any gaps.
Hi for all. It's a pleasure to stay here to speak about dynamic controlled atmosphere, and congratulations for Zanella. It was a very interesting talk. Dr. Nicolai said an important point, that is the control of oxygen in the CA store, because the airtight is very difficult in big CA storage room. And so we developed for many years ago and methods that we measure the RQ into the CA store. But we soon saw that it's difficult to management the equipment inside the store because the humidity is very high and so. And there we started to new methods. And so we developed a method that use only the CO2 production of the fruit that we measure outside of the store. And so with this method, with this modeling method, we can look the RQ in the CA room. And this method actually is patented for in a German company. But we have more problems with the RQ measurement in the CA room. It's the following. When the methods that exist today on the market, also our RQ method, we must stop the absorption, turn off the absorption system and also the injection of oxygen. And this is difficult for a long time. The management for the commercial stores is difficult. And so we are now looking for a new method that doesn't need a need to turn off the absorption of oxygen and the absorption of CO2 and the injection of oxygen. And we hope these methods will be a little bit better, but we must make more researches about this. But we have good results with DCA, with extreme low oxygen. Dr. Zanella said that the problem in some apple cultivar is the production of ethanol. And we saw that ethanol is a good product for control ripening in the store. And we have done for for 20 years ago an experiment that we applied the ethanol in the CA store, and we had better quality of the fruits. And so we started to think that it's possible to that the fruit produce the ethanol for the reduction of the respiration. And now we use very low oxygen levels in the CA stores. Here in Brazil, we have commercial CA stores that use about between 0.1 to 0.4% of oxygen. And in the university, we have in small scale, we have normally in oxygen about 0.06% in the store. And this concentration gives the best results. We don't need to apply 1 MCP, and the apples normally are better than MCP-treated fruits. And so it is possible to use very, very low oxygen levels. But is one information is important. We must conditioning the fruit to stepwise to reduce the oxygen in the storage room. You can't put the fruit in the store and slow down the oxygen to 0.2 or so. You must it stepwise. And so the RQ gives you the information, and you can reduce the oxygen, for example, for gala apples into 2 or 3 months to 0.1. For other apple cultivar, you need you can L-star. You can also reduce to 0.1 the oxygen level. But other cultivars like Brackmann, Foggia, and so the apple varieties that had a very consistent, very compact flesh pulp of the fruit. These fruits, these varieties don't allow to reduce the oxygen to very low levels. normally to 0.3 or 0.4, it depends. And the fruit need more time to reduce the oxygen. We need 4 or 5 months to reduce, or more, to reduce the oxygen. And on the end of the period, we have about 0.4, 0.3%. But these conditions give the best results for us for the storage of fruits of different varieties that we tested here, and any we tested in Germany with the help of Dr. In the Institute of Pfaffendorf. And I hope in the future we can use it in commercial serums here in Brazil and also in the world. I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the first round of comments. I will give now the floor to Robert Prange from Canada. Robert?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Wow. Thank you, Georgios and Angelo, and all the other participants. I never thought I'd be participating in such a discussion. Just historically, yeah, Chris, we were cursed back in the early days with the wrong varieties to test low oxygen. The great thinkers of the day were trying to do it on Macintosh or Cox's Orange Pippin. Those varieties nowadays, we've learned really don't like and never did like low oxygen. No wonder they were saying never go down below 1.5% oxygen. 1% was deadly. And indeed, they still are deadly for those varieties. What we have found is things have changed, the varieties have changed, and you just listened to Auri say, and it's true, you can take a Gala, it is the poster variety for low oxygen. It can literally go, I've seen this, Auri, 0.01% oxygen Gala in Brazil. That is real in commercial practice. So that's what was happening over the years. The variety changed, and we have, fortunately, new varieties that do respond positively to a lower oxygen. So that was helpful. We were still trying to do on Macintosh or Cox's Orange or some of those heritage varieties. We wouldn't have this discussion as it is today. Just historically, I'd want to say that Angelo was a real risk taker. I compliment him. He saw the possibilities after the Rotterdam conference. And unbeknownst to me, he did some excellent work. At the same time, we had some trials done out in at the Stimilda operation in Wenatchee. And they discovered with, again, thankfully it wasn't Macintosh, they used organic Red Delicious. And they found that the scald control was absolute. And they were selling organic Red Delicious months after their competitors. And they kept it secret for several years. So that was part of the slow progression of the technology because they didn't share it too quickly with other operators. A couple of comments, and I would give a shout out to the fact that we've learned from all of this that if you go back decades and decades ago, the initial thinking, don't even want to go there, was do you actually have high CO2? Well, that was at higher oxygens. Now the thinking is very much on lower oxygen is the way to go. All right, so I would give a shout out to, I think he's listening, Bram Mouton. He did a great project. He published in the last Acta Hort from the last CA conference. He evaluated different technologies at his institute at the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. And I'll give you the bottom line, and if Bram wants to, or the moderator wants to bring him in, that's fine. He essentially said, cut through all the technologies. it's really how much time do you let those fruits stay at above 1%? In other words, putting it the other way, get the fruit, if it can go down below 1%, and many good things happen, be it skull control. And let's go through the list. Angelo has already started. Once you get down below that and get to the LOL, you begin to see that the ethylene production dies. You see ethylene perception dies. That's in the literature. And the sweet spot is somewhere around, I think, 0.3 to 0.4% oxygen. And another thing is, as you go down, yes, the CO2 tolerance goes down, but we'll switch the conversation to a CO2 to oxygen ratio. And Brahm did it the other way, but I'll use it my way. It's CO2 divided by oxygen. That tolerance value actually goes up when you get down to the LOL. In other words, it doesn't get bothered by a lot of CO2 compared with other levels. And I think Angelo did make a point of that, and hope you grasp that, right, Angelo, that you put some effort into this and you found that some varieties like Gala and others were actually not so bad in terms of CO2 tolerance compared to what we were afraid of. That CO2 tolerance is an issue, and scrubbing of CO2 is important. Mixed in with all this, please remember, it's a dynamic dance of proper temperature, proper oxygen, proper CO2 for that specific cultivar at that stage in the storage season. All of those dance around, and keep that in mind. It's not one recipe for everything. And we're learning, as I think Bart said, it's the front end when things are really crazy at the beginning off the tree, that there's a lot of things happening before the fruits settle in for the longer storage. And the other one I'd add in is the idea of humidity. And I'll maybe not go down that road too far today, but storage humidity is not appreciated because we have a hard time measuring it to begin with. And finally, 1-MCP, and I see some questions in the question box, and I'll give a shout out to Dear Kupka. He sent me his most recent CA recommendations for Northern Germany, and I think Angelo and others have done this too. We have to get into appreciating a mixture of MCP technologies with other technologies that drive the oxygen down. They must be matched. The problem is that we don't get clear information from the manufacturers of 1-MCP as to what is safe. And I've looked into literature, and I'll give you a warning. Everyone knows this. It's essentially, if you put in MCP into this story, your sensitivity for CO2 goes up. On average, you should cut your CO2 by about 40% of what you would do without MCP, about 40%. And that could, I think we're completely blind on that. And one of the problems with MCP right now is it's no longer simply AgroFresh. I've lost count of the number of providers of MCP, and they're all selling it, but they don't have any support. It's up to the people in this group to kind of come up with the what ifs. And I see that in some of the questions on the Q&A. How do we put these things together and not destroy our valuable crop? But I would like to point out again, as I said, and the other thing with RQ, again, it's a dance. The RQ actually can be changed just by simply dropping the temperature of the conditions. It'll push up your RQ, and you'll also get a change in your RQ just by already having CO2 present or not. And that's been known for decades. So again, you have to remember all these things. It's not a single recipe. Here it is, go for it. And the other thing again with fluorescence, which I really have come to appreciate more and more, is it's just a measure sometimes that you can use even without CA. You can use it to track it in normal air. It tracks the senescence of a product. It'll warn you of other stresses, not just for low oxygen. It will warn you if you have, even if MCP is applied, it will suddenly change the fluorescence temporarily. You'll see it happen. If the temperature of the room goes down because the refrigeration system malfunction, it will warn you. If you get ammonia leak, it will warn you. So there's other features that we have to appreciate when we get into this in further discussion. So I'm not going to try and cover everything, but I've hit a lot of topics there, and I'll yield back to George.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the points. Giancarlo, would you like to moderate and select some of the questions raised by the attendees and to assign or give the floor to any of the panelists? I can start with a question about what is the real cost per kilo? Can we have an estimation? Question goes to everybody. About DCA versus 1 MCP, can we have an idea what is the cost per kilo on average, very roughly?
Depends on how you depends on how the provider sells the product, Georgios. MCP, I think, is per bin per year. So you're paying on a per bin every year for that each room you applied for. It may be repeat applications. The pricing is dynamic. Some countries don't have as much money, so the price drops in that particular jurisdiction. With other technologies, I can speak to the fluorescence. It's a straight up purchase. There's no follow-up fees, and some of the sensors from 20 years ago are still in use. So, you know, it's up to the operator to assess the pricing given by the provider.
Okay, thank you.
George, I want to highlight this question by Dario Stefanelli from Australia, who asks about the energy consumption and associated costs, in the sense that he says Australia has a normally higher temperature in general, so higher cost in cooling. So if the aspects related to climate change, which was a part of another question, can in some way be associated to the application of dynamic controlled atmospheres and its cost management.
I can maybe comment on that. So as I mentioned before, a large part of the energy costs of storage in general is, of course, the respiration heat that needs to be removed from the fruit. So both the field heat and then also the respiration heat that is basically produced throughout the storage season. And if you're talking about low oxygen storage, then typically your energy consumption that is proportional to your respiration is linearly affected by the oxygen concentration, which means that if you reduce the oxygen concentration, for example, from 1% to 0.5%, you reduce also the respiration heat by 50%. Of course, it's not only respiration heat. In a cool room, you also have the heat of the fans, which is a very important component. Heat of sometimes lights, doors that are opening, but that's of course not in controlled atmosphere. And then you also have the scrubber cost. And under the condition that you don't scrub your carbon dioxide to the same level as your oxygen, because then you have a lot of energy consumption as well by the scrubbers. Then I think, or the number that is used by the industry is that you can reduce your energy cost by 10% by applying DCA. Okay. So in absolute quantity, if due to climate change the temperature is going up, then DCA is going to be even more advantageous than regular controlled atmosphere.
Okay, I'm taking another question from the QA log. There's been a lot discussed about the impact on flavor and of those oxygen levels. The question by Sandra Landhal is if there are references of the human perception of different concentration of volatile organic compounds and the perception of a combination of different volatiles.
Can I ask you? We made a lot of research about the volatiles of apples stored in DCA. And we observe when you reduce the oxygen level, when the RQ level is about 1.3, 1.5, you have more aroma compounds because ethanol accumulate butanol and hexanol, and ethanol is converted to acetic acid, and this acid combines with other alcohols, and so you have a lot more esters in the production after when the fruit come out from the storage room. Logically, it's the production is not so high like in CA storage room or in cold storage room. It's the reality. But we have more aroma in low oxygen than in fruits treated with 1 MCP. And we can also, when the fruit are treated with 1 MCP, we can reduce the oxygen on the final of the storage period, and we can increase the production of aroma products, and then help a little bit the aroma of the fruit. And some people said when the fruit come out from the store, they had an aroma of ethanol. It's right. The first day, the fruits you can have a little bit an aroma of ethanol. But after every days during selection, transportation, and so the fruit lost this of flavor, or this flavor of ethanol. Thank you.
Perhaps I can add that it is cultivar specific.
Angelo, can you get a little bit closer to the mic, please?
Okay. No, I would like to add that this phenomenon is cultivar specific. As we heard already before, there are different ways of anaerobic processes, and the ones that are going to the amino acids are not producing these precursors. And the other thing is that we are now working. I know you did a lot of work, and I appreciate it a lot. What we have got as a response also from the industry is it typical aroma or is it not typical? And we are trying now to monitor the aroma profiles on the trees of fruits producing aromas on the trees, and to compare with the aroma profile that is then produced during these different storage technologies. Because you're completely right that that we are really inhibiting with normal CA or ULO drastically the VOX production, and with 1 MCP even more.
Angelo, would you like to sum up based on what you have heard, and also to take 2 questions from my side? Question 1, combination of DCA with 1 MCP, do you consider that it can work? And if yes, in which cultivars? And regarding DCA alone, is there a real success story for a specific cultivar that you can highly recommend this technology?
The combination of DCA with MCP treated fruits was for me at the beginning almost a no-go, and it started mainly by Agrofresh, because they observed that they have in fact the problems of preventing scald on red delicious. And in fact, if you observe now also on our showing the diagram on cultivar specific technology diversification, Almost all the red deletions are stored in combination with MCP and DCA. Obviously, you are really inhibiting many processes, ripening processes, but you get this positive result. I find it perhaps of interest taking into account to apply the correct ripening stage, because this is very important. The ripening stage at which we apply the different storage technologies affects a lot the impact of the storage technology. So it can be interesting to use this combination, especially for, and this is the big disadvantage of all these storage technologies, especially when the foods face after storage a long life. A long life that can be a long standing life, then a long transportation time, then perhaps a shelf life in India, and so on. So that could be an interesting way of applying, of combining them. But we have to take care, because due to the ripening stage, we can really also destroy a fruit, not gaining good fruit. And talking, if I want to say about talking about the combination, I was trying to be a bit provocative with my last slides, showing you the development of application of storage technologies here. I mean, we are an example of a large apple producing area, and you saw that there is not a lot of increase of application of DCA. And you saw who is taking over.
Okay.
The only comment I would like to throw in that, you know, we've got to remember the consumer, and the consumer is very complex, and his or her expectations can vary at different times of the year. And so one of the things that with MCP that was always very surprising was how often one MCP would come out as highly light compared with non-MCP treated fruit, which would seem contradictory because we always say MCP inhibits esters. Well, in fact, what we forget is sometimes those esters are undesirable from the consumer point of view. Those esters can be associated with over-maturity of fruit. So the point is that it's so complex, and it's almost a riddle, an impossible riddle to try and put it all together. We're certainly finding that DCA fruit has much more flavor than normal CA fruit as well, which I think speaks to Auri's comments about the effect of DCA, that we would expect that DCA would inhibit those volatiles in the same way that traditional CA did. But again, these apples are they're much more complex than we give them credit for. They're very smart.
Thank you, Chris.
Just on the couple things, I happened to talk to a commercial operation some years ago in Washington State, storing Granny Smith. And he said, I hated Granny Smith. I never know that they could taste so good until after I stored them in DCA. But if you go to a consumer and you go into a supermarket, they're not the same as us. I've talked to people who say, do you like Granny Smith? And I said, they don't have any taste. They said, I don't care. I want the crunch. So, you know, what we think is nice with all that flavor is really not exactly what happens in the real world out in the supermarket. Sorry. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to well, the earlier question to Angelo about the combination of one MCP and DCA. And then from a Belgian perspective, because the DCA implementations that we have in Belgium are essentially on pear. We don't have any, as far as I know, DCA application in practice on apple. And that's of course also because Belgium is a very large pear production, is the largest pear producer of Europe. And the cultivar that we store the most is, to produce the most is conference, and conference is known to be very susceptible to internal browning disorders at low oxygen. And we also know that many cultivars, both apple and pear, that are susceptible to browning disorders in low oxygen conditions are also more difficult to treat with 1-MCP because you basically get the same symptoms, browning symptoms. And we don't really understand why this is. And I have some ideas about it in the sense that I think that as 1-MCP kind of inhibits the signal transduction of ethylene, ethylene sort of plays a role in the changes immediately after harvest in the fruit that prepares the fruit to long-term storage in low oxygen conditions. And if you block the ethylene production, then the fruit might not be able to basically adapt to this drastic stress because of the harvest and then the exposure to low oxygen conditions. Which means, and we also know that, for example, if you have like 1-MCP protocols on pear fruit, they have really extremely long times delays before you basically change the atmospheric composition up to 6, 7 or more, or in 9 weeks. And I think for sensitive products, the combination of 1-MCP, because of this reason, with DCA is not a good idea. I think you should basically stick to either DCA or 1-MCP and then follow the protocol for 1-MCP carefully. And in fact, for pear fruit in Belgium, the DCA protocols that are used are also protocols where there's normal change of the atmosphere in like 3 weeks' time or a couple of weeks' time, and then until the typical oxygen concentration, which is like 3%, and then gradually reduce the oxygen concentration to DCA conditions, and then the DCA algorithm kicks in. So it depends on the cultivar, basically.
Thank you, Bart. I would like to encourage the panelists and Angelo to take a glance. We have numerous questions. Probably we will not be able to answer all of them. Some are very insightful statements, but feel free to take any question that you think that you can address, because we are nearly at the end of our webinar. In every case, if we miss to reply to some questions, please note that I will forward all of them to the panelists, and maybe they can follow up later on after the webinar. But it's good in the last 15 minutes of our webinar to try to respond as many as possible.
I would like to mention one of the questions here by Pierluigi Mattei, who is raising the point of those oxygen levels which are low enough for ethanol production and not too low for chlorophyll fluorescence sensor response. So how do you comment on that, Angelo?
Giancarlo, I see now what he writes. I know his method. He just says
No, regardless, is the other method, just, you know, that borderline between, you know, oxygen level low enough to accumulate ethanol and not low enough to have the response from the chlorophyll sensor.
Okay, so in fact, we can observe ethanol even in a CA stored fruits, because as I showed you, the fermentative metabolism turns on pretty early, and then it depends on the level of concentration of accumulated metabolites whether we perceive them and how we perceive them. If they are in low amounts, we perceive them positively. In higher amounts, they are negative. So it is in fact that's it. So the idea is not to have a predominant fermentation going on, to be still in the aerobic, in a predominantly aerobic state. Yeah. So.
Well, still there are the comments of Professor Brackmann on the very low concentration of oxygen, and actually the positive effects in terms of flavor. But in that case, I see there is a protocol to follow in terms of lowering oxygen.
In fact, Giancarlo, this is very difficult to control, because how can an apple know which concentration of metabolites we perceive as aroma and not?
Yeah.
It is very difficult to. So therefore, the idea is to have an idea when we are still more aerobic than anaerobic, and this is also what Auri is doing with determining RQ or CO2 rate and so on. We are all trying to find out what is the limit, because you would also damage the tissue if you would have too high metabolites. And then everyone, Luigi Mattei has his DCA swing close, everyone has his technology. But for sure, every technology is working well and can be applied in a different situation in a very optimal way.
Indeed, there are many comments on the difference of the real concept, typical flavor, and the off flavor, and how this in some way affects the flavor and the consumer perception of the flavor of the apples.
Okay, Giancarlo, we are in the last 10 minutes, so I will give the floor maximum 2 minutes, please, per panelist. I will start with Auri. A take-home message, a concluding remark from what you heard, from what we might learn more from this webinar. Auri, the floor is yours.
Is it for me? Okay.
Yes, please.
I remember an aspect that I forgot to say before. What is important for the apple to have a good conservation and to slow down the oxygen concentration is when you have an alternation in the oxygen level during the storage. Dr. Zanella showed us and our results that when you made 1 or 2 stresses in the week, you have the best results. This means you give oxygen during 1 day or 2 days, and then you reduce the oxygen to near to 0. And later you let it any hours or 1 day, and you go back and give 0.3 or so. And this movement, this alternation, give the good results for the conservation. They reduce the ethylene production, respiration, and they increase the aroma, the esters of aroma. And another aspect, there was a question about the saving of energy. When you use low oxygen, you can increase the temperature of the storeroom about 2 degrees Celsius. This is an important information for the people that want to use this technology. So I thank for the opportunity to speak here.
Thank you very much also for precisely keeping the time. Giving the floor to Bart.
Yeah, few final remarks. Maybe one, there's been a lot of discussion on aroma, which I believe is of course a very important property, but we should not forget the other quality attributes of apple fruit, in our case in Belgium of pear fruit. There was also one of the remarks in the chat box, what the effect was on texture, and I would add acidity, because in my opinion, one of the reasons that, for example, Smart Fresh or 1-MCP treated fruit is considered to be more tasteful is because of the increased texture, but also because of the increased acidity, especially for apples that have been stored for almost like 1 year. You can have like a loss of like 50% of the acids, and 1-MCP really helps in maintaining that. And to me, this is really the reason why an 1-MCP treated fruit at the end of the season tastes still fresh. And to some extent, you can have the same result with DCA. You keep the acid concentration much higher, and of course, the sugar concentration does not really change too much. So there's also an effect on texture and acidity that we should not forget. So I would conclude with that.
Thank you very much. Robert, your final comment?
Hi, yeah, just a lot of things going through the brain. Quickly, I'll relate experience of a large commercial operation in Washington State. Come to find out that they are storing Granny Smith till Christmas. That is the second Christmas, not the first Christmas, without DPA, without 1-MCP. And I said, how are you doing it? And they said, well, we have learned, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as they come in, we immediately get them down to very low oxygen, like 0.5, and then bring them up to above the LOL. And that was an eye-opener for me. So they said, we don't need MCP, we don't need DPA on Granny Smith. So there's a lot more we can learn from actual practitioners. Some of them are actually putting MCP in at the beginning of the store period. Some are putting them in at the end. I know in South Africa, they're even playing with that combination on a pear, the Packham's Triumph, for skull control before shipping to Europe. Heidi Heigarten asks about Chris and me about these apples on the east coast of North America, these so-called soft color. Heidi, I can only say that those old varieties are very high ethylene producers, high respiration. The newer varieties, and I wish someone could help out on the physiology, the newer varieties the breeders have put out are, I suspect, very low in ethylene production, lower respiration, and more amenable to these kinds of technologies, the DCA. And that breeding, of course, adds to the density that you mentioned there about cortex density. Dan Gamrasny's talking about DCA sensors. Well, as I said earlier, yes, well, certainly with the fluorescence, RQ maybe as well, you can see immediately if the store temperature changes. Essentially, a lower temperature is perceived as a stress, just like low oxygen, and the fluorescence will move up immediately, giving the operator indication. And yes, we can, and we've done a paper, Felix, I think, and Daniel Neuwald from, and Auri. We published out a paper on temperature changes combining DCA and MCP in storage just recently. So we are putting our brain cells together, but we need more. And I'd like to finish off by saying, if you have more questions, go to your local expertise and start there, because they have the best feel for what will work in their varieties in their region, and start asking questions out from there. But please, encourage your local researchers and extension people to get more informed and help out in the commercial area.
Thank you very much. Chris.
So I would like to sort of sum up by saying we are in an incredibly exciting time in post-harvest, and we're talking mainly apples and pears, but who knows what the future holds for other fruit and vegetable types in the future. But it is so exciting, and we've had this 1-MCP revolution in the last 20 years. We've had the DCA revolution in the last 20 years. But on top of that, we have, at least in North America, massive use of plant growth regulators, to the extent that I don't think you do in Europe. But we have Harvester, pre-harvest 1-MCP, we have AVG, and all of those impact our post-harvest factors as well. On top of that, I alluded to this massive change in cultivar mix. So when Bob was talking about Macintosh and I was talking about Macintosh, no, when I came to New York, that was the #1 apple. Now it's on the way out. We have Honeycrisp. We have all these new exciting Cosmic Crisp, all these new exciting varieties, and they have texture maintenance after storage, regardless of the technology. So some of the things that we used to worry about, losing texture, softening post-storage, those factors are not there. But I was really happy to hear Bart mention the acidity. You know, those are those sort of other factors that influence the receptivity. But anyway, the bottom line, you know, I just think it's just so exciting, all the different permutations and combinations, and you can take Angelo's grid with MCP and DCA and CA and ULO and do like a 3-layer grid on top of that if you really wanted to. So it's beyond, this is where we need AI to help sort this stuff out. So I'll stop with that.
Many thanks, first of all, because you wake up so early for joining us. Much appreciated, Chris. Ted, your perspective about this webinar?
I'd like to thank you all for participating. I think it's been a very interesting thing. Post-harvest is not my deal, but I learned quite a bit. Thank you very much. I'd like to encourage you also, we will have another actual Hort forum. George has been very busy, is very busy. We have another Hort forum coming up on agroecology in 2 weeks on the 18th. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to tune into that one as well. Thank you very much. I don't know, is Francois going to say anything?
I would like basically to give the floor to Giancarlo, because he has to make also some announcements, because we have more people about Postharvest. Right. And if Francois is around, he can make a closing remark.
Okay.
Yes, Giancarlo, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, George. I'm actually very happy about the outcomes of this webinar. I just want to mention, and I would like to share my screen if it's possible. What is the work over here? Yes. Yeah, we are having the 16th International Controlled and Modified Atmosphere Research Conference next year in Wenatchee in the United States. The convener will be Dr. Carolina Torres, and that will be May 18 to 22 next year, as I said. Finally, topics related to controlled atmospheres will be also in the next events by ISHS and the Postharvest, the division of Postharvest, which will be in Bucharest next May. There will be an international Postharvest symposium. We will also discuss topics associated with modified atmosphere packaging in the next Fresh Cut conference, which will be organized in Foggia. You see something on my background next June, first week of June. And of course, there will be the big appointment with Postharvest 2024 in New Zealand, where there will be 3 combined events. So lots of things to know, to learn, to present in these events.
Excellent.
Thanks, George, again.
Thank you very much, Giancarlo. Francois, you have 1 minute to close the webinar to be perfectly on time.
Yeah, so not much to say, just to thank you very much, particularly George, for all the work, Angelo, all the panelists, those I know, those I don't know. Actually, I wanted to promote some of the the event you mentioned, Giancarlo. So thank you very much. We are happy you are in ISHS and we can carry on like that. I really appreciate, or I think this kind of event is really appreciated. The way we can discuss, Ted is asking for controversy. There are perhaps not so controversy today. Perhaps on the agroecology, we can have some more fight. Anyway, thank you very, very much, and keep in touch and see you in different events. Thank you, and thank you, George.
Many thanks to everyone, and I will follow up regarding everything about this webinar in order to disseminate the new knowledge also to the attendees that are much appreciated that they spend time to attend this webinar. Many thanks to everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.